Hi, this is Elliot from EO Nutrition. Today's video will be the second part in a two-part series. In the last video, we looked at how you can test for thiamine status in both the blood and the urine testing. In today's video, we will be looking at the different forms of thiamine that you can find in supplementation. So this is the Thiamine Salts, which is Thiamine Mononitrate and Thiamine Hydrochloride. We'll look at benfotiamine, look at what its benefits are, how it's absorbed and how it's processed in the body. And then next we will compare that with my personal favorite form, which is Thiamine Tetrahydrofurfuryl Disulfide, otherwise known as TTFD. So we'll be looking at how that's absorbed, how the body processes that, and we will be examining why I think that this is the best form and that it is superior to other forms of thiamine. Hopefully at the end of the video, you should have a rough idea of what the different forms are, how they are used in the body, and what the benefits and drawbacks of each different form is. Choosing a form of thiamine to take can be quite difficult because there are many different forms and it can be fairly confusing for the average person. So in this table, I've laid out just the basic information of each type. So on the left-hand side, we have two types of thiamine salt, and we'll go through what they are. But essentially, that is mononitrate and thiamine hydrochloride. So both of these generally have poor bioavailability, which means they're not very well absorbed. There is some limited benefits. I mean, you can improve your thiamine status if you're deficient. However, they are fairly limited in their therapeutic potential. Now, thiamine hydrochloride can be used in very high doses and it can provide benefits there, but there are still some limitations to that. Unfortunately, with these two forms, they are slow to cross the blood-brain barrier. They're basically processed in a similar way as dietary thiamine would. In contrast to that, we have a benfotiamine. So on the right-hand side, we have benfotiamine and TTFD. Now, these are two synthetic forms. Now, synthetic has a negative connotation. Basically, synthetic just means that the molecule has been changed in some way. It doesn't necessarily mean that it is unhealthy or that it is detrimental in any way. It simply means that it's been engineered in a certain way to be able to improve the bioavailability. And so benfotiamine is a lipid-soluble or fat-soluble form, or it's thought to be fat-soluble anyway, and it does have much higher bioavailability. So it's got certain characteristics which mean that it's able to bypass the ordinary transport mechanisms. It's very useful for increasing thiamine status peripherally, so in the body, in the organs, and there's a good indication that it does get into the brain. However, that's kind of debated at the moment. Furthermore, it needs to be broken down enzymatically, so we need to alter it chemically in the liver before we can actually use the thiamine in that. Finally, we have TTFD. Now, TTFD, I believe, is the most superior form for several reasons. First of all, its bioavailability is just as good as benfotiamine, if not better. I believe it's likely better simply because it does not require a transport system in any way. So it does not require a transporter to get through from the intestine to the blood, from the blood to the brain, or from the extracellular space to get into the cell. It bypasses all ordinary transport mechanisms. Furthermore, it doesn't need to be broken down enzymatically. You don't need enzymes to break down TTFD to yield thiamine. It does it naturally in the presence of any kind of reducing agent like glutathione. Furthermore, it also has a dual function. It provides sulfur in the form of a prosthetic group which can be used and which there's some evidence that it actually can help the body get rid of heavy metals. We're going to go into all of this in a lot more depth in the rest of the video. So first of all, let's look at the basics. We're taking dietary thiamine, and this is, you can imagine, I mean, this would apply to thiamine salts, but also the thiamine found in food. We need to absorb it. We need to carry it around the blood and transport it. And then when it gets to cells, we need to get it into cells. And the way that it gets into cells doesn't just float into cells. We actually need to transport it into the cells. And this is often one of the problems with thiamine supplements because that transport is what's referred to as saturable. So it's a rate limiting step. It basically limits the amount that you can absorb at any one given time. Once we have thiamine in cells there, we need to run it through a couple of enzymes, phosphorylate it, and actually activate it. When it is activated, only then can we use it in biochemical reactions. So in the intestine, we have these things called saturable transporters. So you can think of these transporters that they're basically like transport proteins, and they're like little gateways. So they have a specific affinity for certain molecules. So you have lots of different transporters for lots of different types of molecules. For thiamine, you have very specific thiamine transporters. And so what you have is when you break down food, when you digest food, you liberate different types of thiamine, different forms of thiamine stored in the food. And then you need to process that thiamine so it's in its free state. And that's done by these other enzymes on the brush border called intestinal alkaline phosphatases. When you've got this free thiamine floating around in the gut, then it can be uptaken into the intestinal cells through these little transport proteins. And here is where it's really important. They are saturable. So they can only absorb a certain amount at any one given time. There's a limit on how much they can absorb, and this is the really important point, is that once that reaches that limit, then you can't absorb anymore. What thiamine you do absorb, then it's going to be exported from the intestinal cell into the blood. When it gets into the blood, it's mainly going to be carried by red blood cells, albumin in the plasma, in the blood plasma, and a little bit on the white blood cells. In this diagram, it shows how thiamine is generally transported around the body. There, it's going to be distributed to different tissues, and when it gets to the tissue, you need to get it into the cells. So much like the intestine, you don't just absorb what is there. In fact, you absorb what your transport system can facilitate. So like in the intestine, you had these transport proteins, you have similar types of proteins on the membrane of each individual cell that needs thiamine. So you can see from this diagram, you have thiamine in the blood, and that is going to be absorbed by the cells through these thiamine transporters. Much like in the intestine as well, these are also saturable. Now, the blood-brain barrier is basically a collection of cells. A simple way of looking at it is a barrier between the brain and all that's inside the skull and the blood. This is a very selective barrier in that you need to be very selective about what gets into the brain, because if you get toxins into the brain, then you can become very sick. So actually, you need to kind of limit what comes in and what doesn't come in. So once again, a similar concept applies. You can absorb a little bit of thiamine into the brain, but it's generally very slow, right? It's slow, and even at high concentrations, you can diffuse some thiamine into the brain, but you're always going to be limited on how much you can get in at any one given time, because you have specifically designed mechanisms to prevent certain things from getting in the brain that shouldn't be there. So now with that in mind, the key points to kind of know is that we have this transport system, we have this absorptive system. We absorb it in the gut, we absorb it into the brain, we absorb it into the cells, but that the absorption into the cells, into the different organs, is very much limited by our transport system, by those transport proteins. And when you reach a certain limit, you cannot absorb any more. So now let's go into some more detail, the different forms of thiamine. So first of all, we have Thiamine Mononitrate. This is probably one of the cheapest forms. It's referred to as a thiamine salt. It is actually a thiamine salt. It's formed by thiamine reacted with nitric acid. And this is generally what you would find in very low quality supplements. It's also used in food fortification. So animal feed and whatnot will contain thiamine mononitrate. Similarly, another salt is thiamine hydrochloride. Now, this is probably a lot more common. This is going to make up probably 90% of all thiamine supplements that you find on the market. And so this, again, is a thiamine reacted with a hydrochloric acid to form thiamine hydrochloride. This is very cheap to purchase, it's like dirt cheap, and it's very widely available. Both of these thiamine salts, when you consume them, they will be processed in a similar way to dietary thiamine. So they will be broken down to free thiamine in the gut, and then you will absorb that thiamine as you would the thiamine coming from food. So the benefits of thiamine salts is that they are really cheap, they're widely available, and you can use them in extremely high doses to provide some benefit. Whereas on the other hand, there are some pretty severe drawbacks. So we have very low intestinal absorption. That the estimated oral bioavailability is around 3 to 8% because it's limited by that transport system. If you're gonna look to apply this clinically, sometimes in some people you need to use very high doses, anywhere between kind of 200 to 2000 milligrams. Some people actually go quite a lot higher than that as well. I would not personally recommend that, but it has been done. So now we're going to look at a different form, and this is benfotiamine. So you might have heard of benfotiamine as being a superior form of thiamine. Now, benfotiamine compared to thiamine salts, so thiamine hydrochloride and mononitrate, yes, benfotiamine is definitely superior. Benfotiamine is basically one of the derivatives, along with TTFD and many other derivatives, which were synthesized and studied extensively in Japan. The main reason for this was to find ways to get thiamine in higher doses into people in a more bioavailable form to essentially treat long-term severe thiamine deficiency. Now, what the researchers found was that there were specific qualities of each different one. So this benfotiamine, its chemical name is S-benzoyl-thiamine O-monophosphate, okay? Long name. Basically what it means is that it's a little bit more lipid soluble, so it's fat soluble, and that means that the absorption is quite significantly higher than ordinary thiamine would be. The way that we process benfotiamine is different to thiamine hydrochloride. So benfotiamine, when we ingest it, it's broken down by intestinal ALP, so alkaline phosphatases. It's broken down to this other product called S-benzoyl-thiamine. Now, S-benzoyl-thiamine is then absorbed into the blood. It goes to most of it goes to the liver, right? When it gets to the liver, it needs to be enzymatically broken down by enzymes called thioesterases. And this is going to yield a very high amount of free thiamine, thiamine monophosphate, and also benzoic acid or benzoate. Now, in the form of free thiamine, this is then going to be kind of transported through the blood, and then it's going to make its way to the different organs from the liver as thiamine. Now, when that happens, you are going to be pumping up blood levels significantly. Remember that benfotiamine, the bioavailability is very high. So the blood levels increase rapidly. And when it gets to the brain, then because there is a higher concentration in the blood, you are going to have it does demonstrate that benfotiamine can affect the levels in the brain to some extent. The way that it's getting to the different organs is going to be as free thiamine. Now, there's some debate about whether it gets into the brain or not. It does seem to. There's some studies which have shown that it does increase levels by a significant amount, whereas there's some other studies which show that it doesn't that much. Either way, I tend to think that it does. I'm pretty convinced that it does affect the levels in the brain, but it's no different to taking a very, very high dose of ordinary thiamine, in my opinion. So the benefits of benfotiamine from a chemical standpoint, I mean, because it is lipid soluble, it has excellent bioavailability. It's estimated to be around 5 to 10 times as bioavailable as ordinary thiamine salts. So 5 to 10 times the amount is going to be absorbed per dose. It also yields greater levels of active thiamine than ordinary thiamine supplements. Now, It's been shown to massively increase the levels in the liver, increases the levels in various organs, the muscle, kidney, etc. It's also been very well studied in diabetic neuropathy and other diabetic complications. It seems also to have somewhat of an antioxidant effect. It does kind of counteract oxidative stress, other kind of protein glycation and damage and things. And it's pretty widely available. So many of the supplement companies are now supplying benfotiamine. It's a decent form to take. It's touted to be the best form of thiamine. However, there are significant drawbacks. So first, it cannot enter cells without a transporter. That is clear. It's been shown that when you compare TTFD with benfotiamine, benfotiamine does not enter the cells, whereas TTFD does. So benfotiamine does need to be processed in some way before it can yield active thiamine. At the same time, there is uncertainty about whether it penetrates the brain to a large extent. Now let's compare this with Thiamine Tetrahydrofurfuryl disulfide, so TTFD. Now TTFD is much less well known than benfotiamine. In fact, practically none of the supplement companies, the big ones, supply this nutrient. However, this was the form that was synthesized in Japan, which was actually favored by the researchers there, and for good reason. This, if you look at the molecular structure of TTFD, we see that it has a disulfide bridge, and it's this disulfide bridge connecting this prosthetic mercaptan group to the thiamine molecule. So you have this thiamine molecule, but then you have this extra group which is attached via this disulfide bridge. This gives the TTFD molecule very unique qualities that is not possessed by benfotiamine. Because of TTFD's molecular structure, it's soluble in water, yet it freely passes through the lipid membranes in cells, so it completely bypasses all known transport systems. It has this disulfide bond, or the disulfide bridge, which is basically two sulfur atoms bound together or bonded together. And what this essentially allows it to do is be absorbed through the intestine without the necessity of a transporter. It can also be absorbed into the cells without the necessity of a transporter, and likewise it has a similar effect in the brain as well. Now here's a diagram. What essentially happens when we take TTFD is readily absorbed, and as it reaches the cell membrane, it's reduced by some kind of reducing agent, say glutathione, and the prosthetic group, this extra group on the molecule, detaches from the thiamine. The thiamine enters into the cell, and then we end up with this extra source of sulfur compounds coming from that extra group, laying on the outside of the cell, and this sulfur group, it's called a mercaptan moiety. This essentially can be used in antioxidant or detoxification reactions. TTFD is extremely high in bioavailability. In fact, it seems that it would be higher than benfotiamine, but it's at least as high as benfotiamine. The research is fairly unclear on the exact percentage that's absorbed, but there was some older research which showed, or the researchers basically based on their results, they said that that TTFD orally was basically equivalent to IV administration of thiamine hydrochloride. So I don't know if that's outdated or not, but what we can know for sure is that TTFD is extremely bioavailable. Now, the distribution, it's been shown that TTFD saturates multiple different organs, saturates the heart, the brain, the liver, the blood cells, the intestine, the kidneys. And what we know for sure is that TTFD definitely does cross the blood-brain barrier. It does this without the need for a transport system. And because of this, because we can bypass this rate-limiting transport system, this is especially helpful for resolving long-term chronic deficits. In fact, world-leading authority Dr. Derek Lonsdale has written about this molecule extensively, and it was definitely his preferred form. It's been studied and it's marketed very heavily in Japan, but it's not well known in the West. And It is indeed the preferred form for treating thiamine deficiency because it seems to be superior to benfotiamine. TTFD has indeed been used clinically in a variety of thiamine deficiency diseases, including dysautonomias, digestive beriberi, cardiovascular, neurological diseases. I have personally used it. I've made several videos about the use of this molecule, and in some cases, it seems to work miracles. What we have to remember is that there are polymorphisms, genetic polymorphisms, which may make it so that someone is less able to absorb thiamine, either at the intestinal or the cellular level. And when that happens, it can predispose one to developing somewhat of a deficit. So TTFD can completely bypass that problem. And for this reason, it is the best way to get thiamine into the body. As I said previously, there is this extra prosthetic group attached to the thiamine molecule. This is called the Tetrahydrofurfuryl mercaptan moiety. So essentially, this contains a certain type of sulfur, which when it's reduced turns into a thiol. Now, the sulfhydryl groups on this molecule can then go on to influence heavy metals in the body and may actually help to detoxify them. But that is the topic for the next video. There are some potential drawbacks of using TTFD. Individuals who have kind of well-established sulfur sensitivity, so people who react to sulfites and who have problems tolerating Epsom salts and other types of sulfur-containing amino acids, these people may experience some adverse reactions like sweating or rapid heartbeat, palpitations, this kind of thing. Although what I will say is that many people actually don't. Many people think that they have sulfur problems, but then when they take allithiamine, it doesn't cause them any issues. Another potential drawback here is that it's not widely available. In fact, barely anyone knows about it. There's not that many people talking about it whatsoever. There's Dr. Derek Lonsdale, who's been trying to shine light on this for many years. There's Dr. Chandler Mars, who runs Hormones Matter. There's a couple of people here and there, but actually TTFD is basically unknown. Now, up until now, the only form that you could find in the Western world was filled with nasty fillers, unnecessary additives, such as magnesium stearate. So I don't believe that for someone to benefit from a nutrient or nutrient supplementation, they need to be exposed to all of the unnecessary fillers that often go into supplements. In fact, oftentimes if you look at supplement ingredients, then you'll find that the majority of the capsule is an inactive ingredient. So it's a flow agent. It's some kind of chemical which helps the powder flow through the machines in supplement production. Or it's some other kind of filler to bulk out the capsule to essentially make it cheaper for the companies to make the product and increase profits. Well, I don't think that someone should have to be exposed to that kind of stuff. In fact, many of my clients are very sensitive to these kind of ingredients. And although some companies will have you believe that they are inactive, in many people they can actually produce kind of allergic or other kind of reactions which shouldn't really have to happen. Unfortunately, the only form of TTFD on the market is packed full of fillers. And so the only way that I could kind of get around this to get my clients to have access to a high quality TTFD without any fillers that they might be sensitive to, I decided the best possible thing to do was just to manufacture my own. So that's basically what I did. I formulated a thiamine supplement containing 2 ingredients. It's pure TTFD powder, and it is a little bit of magnesium as magnesium taurate. Magnesium is a cofactor for transketolase and is generally recommended alongside thiamine therapy. So essentially, this thiamine product has 3 ingredients: pure thiamine, a little bit of magnesium, and gelatin capsules. And so that is now on the market for anyone to purchase. If you would like to purchase a clean, pure thiamine supplement as TTFD, you can find that available to purchase on www.objectivenutrients.com. If you like this video or you found it helpful, please like and subscribe to my page. You can find me on Facebook as EO Nutrition. You can find my website, www.eonutrition.co.uk. So in the next video, we'll be digging deeper into how TTFD, the certain form of thiamine that I've been talking about today, how that is able not only to replenish thiamine stores, but plays a second role potentially as a heavy metal chelator supporting detoxification. So stay tuned and I will see you next time.